It was just another Tuesday morning. Ordinary, predictable, almost comforting in its routine. I was wrapped in my favorite gray cardigan, the one with worn cuffs that somehow still felt luxurious against my skin. A faint drizzle tapped against the windows, tracing erratic paths down the glass, and the city beyond blurred under a shroud of soft rain. I loved mornings like these. Quiet, introspective, perfect for diving into work. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the room, mingling with the faint scent of lavender from the diffuser I kept on the desk. I took a sip, savoring. The bitter warmth as I settled into my home office chair, the leather creaking softly beneath me. With one hand on the mouse, I opened my laptop, fingers dancing over the keys as I logged into my inbox. The first email caught my eye. Employment. Status update from HR. I frowned, confused, and clicked. The message loaded with a clinical detached efficiency, stark black text on a glaring white screen. Dear Emma, we regret to inform you that due to internal restructuring, your position as COO will no longer be required, effective immediately. Your severance package details are attached. Sincerely, Human Resources. My hands went numb, fingers frozen in place. I blinked, then read it again. Then again. The words didn't change, didn't soften, didn't offer any clue as to why. A hollow, ringing filled my ears, drowning out the distant hum of the city below. My heart thudded against my ribs, and I felt a sudden wave of nausea clawing its way up my throat. I took a breath, shallow, shaky, and forced myself to move, setting the coffee cup down with a trembling hand. It teetered, spilling a small puddle onto the desk. I couldn't process it. Not like this. Not through a cold, impersonal email. No meeting, no warning, just terminated. After everything, years of building this company from a shaky startup to a $110 million success story, I was discarded like an old memo. Grabbing my phone, I dialed Nathan's number, straight to voicemail. I called again, and again, but each attempt was met with the same robotic response. Text messages sat unread, marked with the painful, indifferent silence of a grayed-out checkmark. I leaned back, feeling the walls of the room inch closer, pressing down on me. The ring on my finger glinted dully in the dim light, and I absently twisted it, an unconscious habit from years of clinging to stability. My thoughts spun in chaotic circles. Nathan, my best friend, my business partner, the one who promised we'd never leave each other behind. We had built this together from the ground up. Late nights, last-minute pitches, endless problem-solving. He knew how much this meant to me, how much I sacrificed. Where was he now? Why wouldn't he pick up? I stood up abruptly, my legs unsteady. I paced the room, my mind racing, heart pounding. Was it a mistake? A glitch? Or worse, had Nathan planned this? Cut me out deliberately? I looked out the window at the skyline we used to dream about, our vision of success. I could almost hear Nathan's voice echoing in my mind from those early days when we barely had enough money for takeout. One day, we'll be at the top. Emma, just you and me. My hands curled into fists, nails digging into my palms, grounding me through the pain. The betrayal felt like a physical wound, a deep, festering gash. I couldn't just stand here and let it consume me. I needed answers. Wiped the coffee spill mechanically, the motion robotic, my mind still locked in disbelief. My phone buzzed. An email notification. I glanced at the screen. Another HR message with my severance package breakdown. My stomach lurched. This was real. I didn't cry. I couldn't. There was a numbness settling in, a cocoon around my heart, protecting me from the sharp edges of reality. I turned off my laptop and sat down on the floor, clutching my wedding ring, the one constant in my life that hadn't betrayed me. Yet. Staring at the blank wall, I whispered to the silence. Why? "Nathan, why did you do this?" And somewhere in the silence, I swore I could hear his laugh, cold, distant, like a memory already fading. When I think back to how it all began, it's almost laughable in its simplicity. Two broke college students with a shared dream and a taste for late-night takeout. Nathan and I met during a startup boot camp. He was the charismatic visionary. I was the practical strategist. He spoke in big, sweeping ideals, sketching out grand visions on coffee-stained napkins, while I mapped out every logistical detail on spreadsheets until my eyes blurred. We were opposites in every way that mattered, and yet it worked. The first office we rented wasn't really an office at all. It was a cramped room above a laundromat, where the constant hum of industrial dryers served as background noise to our whispered brainstorming sessions. We survived on cheap instant noodles and black coffee, rationing our enthusiasm on days when the bank balance dipped too close to zero. But it didn't matter. We had something greater than financial stability. We had belief. I remember the first time we pitched our idea to investors. Nathan, with his perfectly tailored blazer, stood at the front of that mahogany conference table, all charm and conviction. I sat beside him, hands shaking slightly, a folder of projections and market research clutched to my chest. He was dazzling. I was thorough. We played off each other with the kind of synchronization you'd expect from dance partners, not business, partners. When he'd gesture grandly about the limitless future, I'd ground it with numbers and timelines, bringing those dreams into sharp, attainable focus. The investors were impressed. They nodded along, scribbled notes, and finally shook our hands with that decisive grip that meant they were in. Nathan squeezed my hand under the table, his grin wide and triumphant. "We did it," he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. It felt like magic then. Like we'd somehow cracked open the universe and found a way to pull our dreams into reality. Michael, my husband, was thrilled for us, at first. He toasted our success with a bottle of cheap champagne, grinning proudly as I recounted the story, breathless and exhilarated. But as the months stretched into years and our little startup grew, the cracks in my marriage began to form. Missed dinners, canceled plans, late nights hunched over my laptop while Michael sat alone at the dinner table, his food growing cold. I convinced myself it was temporary, that the sacrifices were worth it. But I could see it in his eyes, the slow fading of admiration into something colder, something I didn't want to name. I chose not to see it, just as I chose not to see the slow shifts happening with Nathan. In the beginning, he always included me, always credited me as his partner. But as the company grew and the media attention swarmed in, my name started appearing less in the articles. Nathan became the face of the company, shaking hands at networking events, giving keynote speeches while I managed the back end, orchestrating the chaos from behind the scenes. The first time I noticed it was during a panel discussion at a tech conference. I watched from the audience as Nathan fielded questions with that easy charm of his, deflecting credit from our shared milestones as if he alone had pulled the company from the ashes. He didn't even mention me, not once. I told myself it didn't matter. I didn't need the spotlight, but somewhere deep in my chest, something ached. The champagne bottle from our first $1 million contract still sat in my office, collecting dust. Its label was scratched, and the foil had started to peel, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. It was a relic of the days when we were partners in more than just name. Back when he'd look at me and say, "We're going to change. Everything, Emma. Just you and me." But things had changed. I saw it in the way he took phone calls outside of the room, his voice hushed and hurried. I saw it in the way he'd introduce me at events as the head of operations, not his co-founder. His laughter at board meetings grew a little louder, his handshakes a little stronger, while I slipped further into the background, managing the chaos while he took the credit. I ignored it. What else was I supposed to do? It was Nathan, my best friend, my business partner, We had built this together, sacrificed for it. When he smiled at me during those brief moments we did meet, I convinced myself I was imagining things. But now, sitting here with that cold email burning into my mind, I realized I hadn't imagined it. Not even a little. I had chosen not to. See the red flags? I had blinded myself with loyalty, with trust. I thought back to that cheap champagne bottle. I had kept it as a symbol of our first real success, a testament to what we had achieved. But now it seemed more like a monument to my own naivety. I glanced at the office keys still hooked onto the brass keyring I kept by my desk. I'd had those since the beginning, since the day we opened the door to our very first office. They felt heavy in my hand, their edges cool and unforgiving. I hadn't been back to the building in months. Nathan had insisted he'd take care of things, that I should focus on the bigger picture. I hadn't questioned it. Now, I wondered why I hadn't. The champagne bottle glimmered softly in the morning light, the keys cold and firm in my palm. They were relics of a life I thought I understood. Now, they were reminders that I had ignored the whispers of doubt, the quiet creaks of betrayal that had been unfolding right under my nose. Nathan had played his part well, and I, foolishly, had played mine. The rain came down in heavy sheets as I pulled into the parking lot of the office, my tires splashing through the growing puddles. The familiar building loomed above me, glass and steel reflecting the darkened sky. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened. I had tried calling Nathan all morning. Voicemails, unanswered texts, emails sent into the void of cyberspace. Nothing. Just silence. My breath fogged up the windshield, and I rubbed at it absently, my mind a blur of questions and half-formed accusations. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I forced myself to step out into the downpour, my heels clicking against the wet pavement as I hurried inside, brushing past security with a nod that used to be met with friendly smiles. Today, they barely looked at me. The elevator ride up felt longer than usual, each floor dinging in slow, measured tones that pulsed in my skull. I watched the numbers light up, my reflection fractured in the metallic surface. Wide eyes, damp hair sticking to my cheeks, and the faint smear of mascara under my eyes. I didn't care. All I wanted were answers. When the doors slid open, I stepped into silence. The usual hum of voices, the ringing of phones, the clatter of keyboards. It was gone. My footsteps echoed as I walked through the rows of desks, each one occupied, yet eerily quiet. Heads turned as I passed. Eyes darted away when I met their gaze. My desk was gone. Not just cleared off, gone. The space where it had been was now occupied by a low, sleek coffee table and 2 modern chairs. My nameplate was nowhere to be found. I stood there, frozen, as the realization sank in like a stone. Nathan. My voice shattered the silence, sharp and desperate. Heads whipped around, whispers flitted across the room like gnats. I stormed down the hallway, heels digging into the carpet, each step pounding out my rage. I threw open his office door without knocking. He was there, sitting behind his glass desk, fingers steepled, a serene smile spreading across his face. And sitting across from him was a woman I had never seen before. Young, polished, with perfect hair and a blazer that screamed designer. Her smile was equally serene, polished like glass. Nathan leaned back, his chair creaking under his weight. "Emma?" he said simply, as if I had just interrupted a lunch meeting. I stared at him, disbelief carving trenches across my heart. What the hell is going on? My voice was low, barely a whisper, but the venom in it was unmistakable. He exchanged a glance with the woman, then back to me. "I assume you received the email," he said, his voice smooth, practiced. "This is Rachel. She's our new COO." The room tilted. I blinked. Once, twice, my hands gripping the back of a chair for support. "Excuse me?" I forced the words out through clenched teeth. "Internal restructuring," Rachel said cheerfully, like she was discussing a minor office renovation. "We appreciate everything you've done, but Nathan and the board felt it was time for a new direction." My mouth opened, but no words came out. My mind whirled, fragments of conversations, meetings, decisions, all clicking together like puzzle pieces I should have seen before. "The board?" I whispered. "Nathan. We built this together." Nathan's smile didn't falter. If anything, it grew wider. "Business is business, Emma. Nothing personal, nothing personal." The words hit me like a blow to the chest. I straightened, squaring my shoulders. "You think you can just erase me? Wipe me out of this company like I never existed?" Rachel's smile never faltered. "Security is here to escort you out," she said softly, her voice a velvet blade. I turned to see 2 guards standing by the doorway, their hands clasped in front of them, eyes unflinching. My eyes darted back to Nathan, searching for something. Guilt, regret, even hesitation. But there was nothing. Just cold, glassy indifference. I stepped back, head held high, forcing my legs to move, to carry me out of that office, down the hallway, past the employees who refused to meet my eyes. I walked out of the building, the rain soaking through my clothes almost immediately, but I kept walking. 1 foot in front of the other, heels splashing through puddles, until I reached my car. I climbed inside and slammed the door shut, the world muffled, silent. I sat there, dripping water onto the leather seats, my breath coming in ragged bursts. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking. My ring caught the dim light filtering through the rain-splattered window, a symbol of commitment, loyalty, partnership. A symbol of everything that had just been shattered. When I finally made it home, I collapsed onto the living room floor, the carpet rough against my cheek. My breath came out in ragged sobs, the kind that rip you apart from the inside. I clawed my way to the bookshelf, pulling down a photo album with shaking hands. My fingers fumbled through the pages until I found it. The photograph. Nathan, Michael, and me, standing in front of that first office space. I traced their faces with my fingertips. Michael, my husband, standing beside Nathan, both of them grinning like they owned the world, like we did back then. My hands shook as I held the photo, my tears smudging the edges. I couldn't understand. Michael had been distant lately, yes, but he always supported me, always stood by me. I grabbed my phone, dialing his number with shaking fingers. It rang once, twice, 3 times, then voicemail. I tried again, and again, and again. Silence. A chill ran down my spine, settling in my bones. I stared at the photograph. Nathan's grin stretched wide. Michael's arms slung around his shoulders. Pieces fell into place. Subtle glances, hushed conversations. Weekends when Michael suddenly needed to work late with Nathan. My stomach turned, the bile rising to my throat. I had been blind. I dropped the photograph, letting it flutter to the floor, and fell back onto the carpet, staring up at the ceiling. The room felt vast, empty, as if the walls had been stripped bare. The photograph lay beside me, my tears smearing the ink. But even through the haze, I could still see their faces, still feel their betrayal like knives to the ribs. But something else burned there too, deep beneath the hurt, under the layers of disbelief and grief. Something hot and sharp. A flicker of resolve, of fire. I stayed there for hours, my body aching from the weight of it all. But when I finally rose, I knew one thing with unshakable certainty. I would not be erased. The highway stretched out before me like a ribbon of gray, unraveling endlessly into the fog-cloaked horizon. I drove with the windows down, the wind whipping through my hair, cold and sharp against my skin. The city had vanished behind me hours ago, swallowed up by the rearview mirror, a distant shadow that no longer felt like mine. I had packed only what mattered: a suitcase stuffed with essentials, a box of photographs, my grandmother's journal, and the office keys that still clinked together softly from the passenger seat. The cottage had been hers before it was mine. I hadn't visited in years. She left it to me in her will, a final act of love from the woman who had always understood my need for solitude. Now it felt like the perfect place to disappear. The sea. Road narrowed as I moved further from the city, trees arching over the asphalt in a canopy of green. I turned off the main path, gravel crunching beneath my tires as I made my way down the winding drive. My grandmother's cottage appeared through the mist like a memory, small and sturdy, with ivy creeping up the brick walls and wildflowers tangling around the front steps. It looked untouched by time, preserved in its own bubble of quiet resilience. Parked the car, the engine ticking as it cooled, and stepped out. The air smelled different here, clean, untainted, like rain and earth and possibility. I grabbed my suitcase, the leather handle warm against my palm, and walked up the creaking steps to the door. The key slid into the lock with a familiar click, and I pushed it open, breathing in the scent of old wood and lavender. The inside was exactly as I remembered. A patchwork quilt lay folded on the sofa, lace curtains fluttered softly against the window, and my grandmother's old rocking chair sat in the corner, its paint chipped but sturdy. I set my things down and ran my hand along the bookshelf, dust rising in delicate plumes. There, nestled between cookbooks and gardening guides, was her journal. The one she used to write in every morning as she sipped her tea, the steam curling around her fingers. I pulled it off the shelf and opened it, running my fingers over the pages, her handwriting looping gracefully across the paper. Words of wisdom, reflections on her garden, recipes scribbled in the margins. Her life, captured in ink and bound in leather. I held it to my chest, breathing in the scent of pressed flowers and old paper. And for the first time in days, I felt the weight in my chest lighten. The days blurred together after that, simple, slow, unhurried. I rose with the dawn, the sunlight spilling across the lake, turning the water into a canvas of gold and silver. I walked the garden paths my grandmother had tended to with her own hands, brushing my fingertips against the lavender bushes and rose petals, feeling something unravel inside me. At first, I wandered the house aimlessly, touching the walls, breathing in the memories left behind. But slowly, my routine began to form. Mornings were spent journaling, my thoughts spilling onto the page in waves, anger, grief, confusion, and something else, something sharper, focus. It started with old documents I found in my suitcase, ones I had brought without thinking, contracts, emails, notes from board meetings. I spread them out on the dining table, the wood grain peeking through the scattered papers. At first, I only glanced over them, eyes grazing familiar words. But the more I read, the more the pieces began to click. Nathan had been planning this for years. It wasn't just a sudden betrayal. It was orchestrated, a slow siphoning of my influence, my presence. My name had been erased from key projects, my contributions buried under layers of bureaucracy. I found emails I had never seen before, decisions made without me, contracts signed without my knowledge. I spent days combing through the details, uncovering secrets Nathan had tried to bury. Offshore accounts, restructured shares, backdoor deals. And there, threaded through it all, were Michael's Fingerprints. I should have been devastated, shattered by the confirmation of his betrayal. But I wasn't. Not anymore. Instead, I felt a kind of clarity, an unyielding focus that sharpened my thoughts like a blade. I began to rebuild. Not the company, but myself. I walked the trails behind the cottage, the lake shimmering at my side, the wind tangling in my hair. I learned how to tend the garden, pulling weeds, planting seeds, feeling the earth crumble beneath my hands. I painted the kitchen walls, a soft mint green, my grandmother's favorite color. I fixed the shutters that had sagged under years of neglect. Each small act of creation dulled the ache of destruction I had left behind. People in town started recognizing me, offering kind smiles and curious glances. I reconnected with old friends who had drifted away during my corporate climb, their warmth wrapping around me like a patchwork quilt. I began to feel whole again, each day stitching me back together in fragments. My journal filled up quickly, pages covered in neat cursive and the occasional ink smudge. I wrote about the betrayal, the pain, but I also wrote about the lake, the garden, the way the sunlight danced through the windows in the early morning. I wrote about freedom. One afternoon, while organizing old files in the back room, I found a small dusty box labeled memorabilia. I pulled it down, the cardboard rough against my fingertips, and opened it on the kitchen table. Photographs spilled out. Me, Nathan, Michael, standing in front of our first office, our grins wide and hopeful. There were pictures from company parties, from the first $1 million celebration, champagne glasses raised in triumph. I stared at them for a long time, tracing the lines of Nathan's smile, Michael's arm around my shoulders. I flipped through the stack until I found it, a candid shot from our very first investor meeting. I was at the whiteboard, scribbling notes, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back. Nathan stood beside me, nodding, his eyes locked on the board. Michael was there too, off to the side, phone in hand. His eyes weren't on me or Nathan, they were on the door. I stared at the photograph until my eyes burned. Then I slipped it back into the box, my hand steady. I knew what I had to do, because while Nathan had been busy erasing me, I had been busy rebuilding. And soon enough, he'd know exactly what that meant. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting fragile patterns across the wooden floor. I stood at the window, sipping coffee from a chipped ceramic mug that had belonged to my grandmother. The lake stretched out before me, calm and unbroken, a mirror reflecting the sky. There was a time I would have called it serene, but now I saw it for what it was, still on the surface, churning beneath. The journal lay open on the kitchen table, its pages filled with notes, sketches, and plans scribbled in dark ink. I had spent months unraveling Nathan's web of lies, documenting offshore accounts, falsified contracts, and backdoor deals that stank of corruption. His empire, once gleaming and pristine, was built on rot. It had taken weeks of careful planning and even more patience to contact the right person. Her name was Diane McAllister, a high-profile attorney known for dismantling corporate empires with surgical precision. Her reputation preceded her. Ruthless, unflinching, a force to be reckoned with. She took my call without hesitation. I remember that first meeting vividly. Her office was perched on the 21st floor of a glass tower in the city, sleek and imposing. I wore a simple black dress, my hair pulled back, my eyes clear and unyielding. Diane didn't waste time with pleasantries. She simply gestured for me to sit and asked, "How far do you want to go?" "All the way," I replied, my voice steady. I slid the thick folder across her polished desk, watching as her manicured fingers flipped through the pages. There was no expression on her face, no flicker of surprise or judgment. When she finally closed the folder, she looked up and nodded. "You have enough to burn him to the ground." I left her office that day with a fire ignited deep in my chest. For the first time in months, I felt whole, sharper, clearer. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was planning. The lake house became my war room. Papers and blueprints covered every surface, pinned to walls and stacked in precarious piles. I pored over emails, traced transactions, mapped connections. Names surfaced, people I had forgotten. Old colleagues, former interns, engineers who had left the company under mysterious circumstances. I reached out, carefully and discreetly. Some ignored me. Some hung up. But a few, enough, listened. Their voices were hushed, cautious, but the stories spilled out. Nathan had changed. His leadership had grown cold, his promises hollow, promotions that were hinted at, never delivered, ideas that were stolen, credit reassigned. I took notes, scribbling down names and dates, building my case brick by brick. I never told them about the lake house. They didn't need to know where. I was rebuilding, only that I was. The blueprints pinned above my desk weren't for nostalgia. They were for my own project. A startup that mirrored what Nathan and I had once dreamed of, but better, cleaner. My designs, my software, untainted by his greed. The whispers started slowly. I watched them ripple through the industry from the comfort of my kitchen table, laptop humming softly. My name began to surface again, in back channels and board meetings, whispers of a comeback. I smiled the first time I saw it, an article speculating on the woman who had disappeared. Nathan and Michael were oblivious, still parading their success, still shaking hands and smiling for the cameras. I saw them in press releases, their faces plastered on magazine covers. Michael looked polished, perfect as always, his arm around Nathan like they were brothers instead of conspirators. But I knew the truth. I had seen the emails. Michael wasn't just complicit. He was an architect of my downfall. He had whispered into Nathan's ear, suggested strategies, offered financial insights. He had built me up just to watch me fall. The first time I leaked information, it was small, just a whisper to a tech journalist I knew from our early days. A hint of mismanagement, a rumor of offshore accounts. It barely made waves, just a whisper among the noise. But I wasn't aiming for an explosion. I wanted erosion, and it worked. The week stretched on, my company slowly taking form. I hired developers, engineers, and old friends who had left Nathan's grasp, their talents buried under layers of corporate red tape. They were loyal, not to Nathan, not to Michael, but to the vision we had once shared, the one I still believed in. I worked in silence, moving in shadows, watching as Nathan's empire cracked at the edges. He knew something was wrong, but not who was pulling the strings. His PR team scrambled, releasing statements of confidence, citing expansion and innovation. But the whispers grew louder. One afternoon, I sat by the lake, the blueprints spread. Out on the picnic table, my laptop open beside me. Diane called, her voice steady and sharp. It's time. We met at her office again, this time with stacks of evidence neatly bound, labeled, and ready. Diane handed me a pen, the weight of it solid and heavy in my hand. I signed each page with deliberate strokes, watching as my name took its place in ink. This time, I wouldn't be erased. Diane smiled as she collected the documents. He won't see it coming. I met her gaze, my voice cool and steady. He never saw me. The first cracks appeared a week later. A news article detailing potential discrepancies in Nathan's financial reports. Anonymous sources cited offshore accounts, falsified revenue, and embezzlement. Nathan denied it all, of course. He called it a smear campaign, an act of desperation from competitors. I watched his press conference from the lake house, my feet curled beneath me on the old leather couch. He looked tired, lines of worry carved into his brow. I sipped my coffee and smiled. By the end of the month, 3 more articles surfaced, each more damning than the last. Diane's network was efficient, her contacts well-placed. Nathan's empire began to wobble, his board members growing restless, investors pulling back. Michael called me once. His number flashed across my screen, familiar and uninvited. I watched it ring, my heart steady, my breath calm. I let it go to voicemail. He never called again. My own company launched in silence. No grand press releases, no ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Just a website, clean and polished, with a simple announcement. Building better futures. My name was there, bold and unapologetic. Emma Holden, CEO, and, just like that, I was back. The elevator hummed quietly as it ascended, the soft thrum of machinery vibrating beneath my feet. I watched the numbers flicker, climbing steadily. 17, 18, 19. The briefcase in my hand felt solid and heavy, a comforting weight against my palm. I stood alone, my reflection fragmented in the polished metal walls, hair neatly pinned back, sharp black suit tailored to perfection. The woman staring back at me was unrecognizable from the one who had once crumbled in the rain, clutching a photograph of a past that no longer belonged to her. The elevator chimed softly at the top floor, and the doors slid open with a whisper. The reception area sprawled before me, minimalist and sleek, decorated with glass sculptures and abstract paintings that screamed corporate excess. A young woman at the front desk looked up, her eyes widening slightly. I watched as recognition flickered across her face, replaced quickly by professional neutrality. "I'm here for the board meeting," I said evenly, my voice carrying through the marble-floored lobby. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the intercom. "And you are?" I leaned in, my gaze never leaving hers. "Emma Holden." Her cheeks flushed, and she stammered out a response, reaching for the phone. I'll let them know you're here." I smiled then, a small, practiced gesture. "You do that." I walked past her before she could respond, heels clicking against the polished floor. The conference room lay at the end of the hallway, its glass walls shimmering under fluorescent light. Through the transparent barrier, I saw them. Nathan, at the head of the table, flanked by board members and advisors, all dressed in shades of navy and charcoal. His laugh was loud and exaggerated, his hand resting casually on the back of Michael's chair. Michael. My heart clenched for just a moment, the betrayal still a jagged edge that hadn't fully dulled. He sat with the same polished posture he always had, his hair perfectly groomed, his tie knotted precisely at his throat. Once upon a time, that image would have stirred something in me. Pride, affection. Now it was just a hollow reminder of lies I had willingly believed. I stepped forward, pushing the glass door open without hesitation. The conversation ceased immediately, heads turning in synchronized surprise. I let the silence stretch. Let it breathe. Let it grow. Nathan recovered first, his expression sliding into something resembling a grin. "Emma," he said smoothly, leaning back in his chair. "I didn't realize you were still around." "Oh, I'm still here," I replied, placing my briefcase on the conference table and clicking it open. I watched his gaze flicker to the documents inside, neatly organized, labeled, undeniable. His smile faltered just slightly. "What's this?" he asked, his voice too casual. "This?" I pulled out the first file, spreading it across the table. "This is the financial trail that leads directly to your offshore accounts. Funny how much a paper trail can tell you, don't you think?" I watched the color drain from his face, the tips of his ears reddening. He glanced at Michael, who sat frozen, eyes wide with disbelief. "This is nonsense," Nathan snapped, leaning forward. "You think you can just barge in here and—" "Oh, I'm not done," I interrupted, pulling out more documents. I laid them out methodically, tapping each with my fingertip. Falsified contracts, backdoor deals, illegal acquisitions. Shall I continue? The boardroom was silent. The board members exchanged glances, whispers threading through the room like static electricity. Nathan stood, his hands braced on the table. You have no idea what you're talking about. I met his gaze, unflinching. Oh, but I do. And so does the SEC. I slid a final folder across the table. I made sure of that. He didn't touch it. His eyes flickered back to Michael, who had gone pale, his hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles whitened. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. What do you want? Nathan's voice was low, venomous. I smiled then. A real smile. One that stretched across my face with the satisfaction of finally breathing clean air. I already have it. I straightened, pulling out a slim manila envelope and tossing it onto the table. I own 51% of the company. The silence that followed was absolute. Nathan stared at me, his expression frozen in shock. That's impossible, he breathed. I would have known. No, you wouldn't. I leaned forward, my palms pressed against the cool glass surface. Because while you were busy erasing me, I was busy buying you out. Piece by piece, under a shell corporation. I tapped the envelope. It's all right there, signed and sealed. Michael rose abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Emma, you can't do this. I cut him off with a look. Oh, I can. And I did. My voice was steady, unyielding. You played your part well, Michael. But this was never your game. He flinched, the words cutting through him like glass. For a moment, I saw the man I had loved, the man who had once believed in me. But that man had died the moment he chose. Ambition over loyalty. I turned back to Nathan. Security will be here soon to escort you out. You can fight it if you want, but I wouldn't recommend it. Diane McAllister is my attorney. The name landed like a punch. Nathan's eyes went wide, and I savored the look, the fear, the helplessness. The board members were whispering now, some of them even standing, backing away as if the contagion of his downfall might touch them. I gathered my papers, slipping them back into the briefcase with deliberate precision. Nathan sank back into his chair, his hands limp in his lap, eyes staring blankly at the envelope I had left on the table. Michael sat beside him, his hands still clenched, his eyes burning with disbelief. I paused at the door, turning back to face them one last time. You should have known better, I said quietly. You should have never underestimated me. And with that, I walked out, my heels clicking against the marble floor like a heartbeat, steady, unyielding, unstoppable. The office on the top floor of the building was mine now. It had been Nathan's, but his nameplate was already gone, replaced with polished silver. Emma Holden, CEO. I stepped inside, the city skyline sprawling out before me, endless and shimmering. I set my briefcase on the desk, running my fingers along the cool glass surface. The keys to the original office, the ones I had kept all these years, sat in my pocket. I pulled them out, laying them next to the wedding ring I had slipped off, moments before. Both symbols of a life I had believed in. Both relics of a past I had outgrown. I leaned back in my chair, the city glittering in the late afternoon light, and closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I breathed, deeply, freely. Had burned it all down, and from the ashes I had risen.